The camera fades in on a dark screen, the sound of a ticking clock echoing louder and louder. A single sentence cuts through the silence. What if the rumors you dismissed as conspiracy were never rumors at all? That opening question is not just dramatic theater. It is the key to unlocking one of the most explosive royal revelations of modern history. At 60 years old, Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, has finally confessed the words that for years were whispered in blogs, dissected on social media, and laughed at by the press as nothing more than fringe gossip. She admitted that her pregnancies with Archie and Lilibet were never pregnancies at all. They were surrogates. For a woman who spent years cultivating an image of maternal pride and who staged photo after photo cradling a growing bump, this confession has landed like a thunderclap across the world stage. It is not merely a personal admission. It is an unraveling of years of speculation, deception, and carefully crafted public theater. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the very first moment Meghan appeared in public as a duchess, she knew she was stepping into an institution that thrived on image, tradition, and the expectation of perfection. The announcement of her first pregnancy with Archie in 2018 was met with global celebration. Newspapers across continents splashed her glowing smile across their front pages. The world was told this was the fairy tale continuing. The biracial American actress turned duchess, now carrying the child who would represent a new chapter in royal history. But even as congratulations poured in, questions were already simmering beneath the surface. Observers noticed inconsistencies. Photographs raised eyebrows. In one clip, her bump seemed to shift unnaturally as she bent forward. In another, the size appeared dramatically different from one public event to the next. These were dismissed by loyal fans as illusions, tricks of the camera, or simple wardrobe quirks. Yet the whispers never stopped. Now, decades later, with Meghan herself confirming that those suspicions were grounded in truth, the story has come full circle. The confession is not just a revelation about motherhood, but a confession about an entire narrative built on illusion. To understand the weight of this moment, we must look back at why the question of authenticity mattered so deeply to so many people. The monarchy is not just a family, it is a symbol, and symbols rest on legitimacy. The idea that the public was misled about something as fundamental as the birth of two children who carry royal bloodlines shakes trust in the institution itself. It forces the question, what else have we not been told? The beginning of this story is rooted in the excitement of new life, of a royal baby expected to bring people together. In October 2018, the palace confirmed Meghan was pregnant. The announcement coincided with a royal tour, and cameras followed her every step. Her hand rested protectively on her stomach in nearly every photograph. That gesture, once considered tender, later came to symbolize suspicion for some. The sheer frequency of it, the theatrical way she displayed her belly, was noted by body language experts as overcompensation. Was she subconsciously trying to remind the world of what she wanted them to believe? These questions, ridiculed at the time, now seem eerily prophetic. In the middle of the narrative comes the unraveling of trust. During Meghan's second supposed pregnancy with Lilibet, the family had already relocated to the United States. By then, tensions with the royal family had reached fever pitch, especially after the Oprah Winfrey interview that painted the monarchy in a deeply unflattering light. Amidst accusations of racism, emotional neglect, and institutional coldness, Meghan and Harry presented themselves as truth-tellers, victims of a system that refused to accept them. But while they claimed to be speaking truth to power, the very foundation of their family story rested on a falsehood that Meghan would only confess decades later. That contradiction is central to why this revelation cuts so deep. It shows that even those who claim transparency can be engaged in elaborate concealment. The world has always been fascinated by royal pregnancies. Princess Diana's pregnancies were documented in minute detail, her every appearance scrutinized by fans and critics alike. Kate Middleton's pregnancies followed the same pattern, with reporters camped outside hospitals and photos snapped at every stage. Meghan's announcement was no different, but it came with a modern twist: social media sleuths. Unlike in past decades, ordinary people could now freeze frame, zoom in, and analyze video footage themselves. Online communities emerged, comparing images, debating whether bumps were shifting, and accusing Meghan of wearing prosthetics. These communities were dismissed as toxic, conspiratorial, even cruel. Meghan herself, in interviews, framed the relentless scrutiny as evidence of racism and misogyny. To many, she was a victim of bullying. But now, her confession validates the suspicions that were long considered taboo to voice in polite company. What once looked like harassment now feels like prophecy. The end of the introduction must do more than simply summarize the scandal. It must set the tone for what follows. This is not just Meghan's story. It is the story of image versus reality, of truth versus deception, of how modern royalty lives under the constant lens of the public. Her confession at age 60 forces us to ask, what drives someone to maintain a lie for so long? Was it fear of public reaction, pressure from the palace, or simply a calculated choice to preserve control over her own narrative? These questions will guide the exploration ahead. They are not just about Meghan Markle. They are about every public figure who balances private struggles with public expectations. They are about the nature of truth in an age where nothing can remain hidden forever. As this series unfolds, we will peel back the layers. The early suspicions, the palace's role, Harry's complicity, the public's reactions, and the impact on Archie and Lilibet themselves. Each chapter will reveal how one lie, about something as natural as pregnancy, can ripple outward to challenge the foundations of trust in one of the world's oldest institutions. And at the heart of it all is Meghan, the woman who went from actress to duchess, from royal rebel to confessor, leaving behind a trail of questions that may never fully be answered. The confession has been made, the damage has been done, and the world is left to decide whether Meghan's honesty came too late or whether at 60, she has finally given us the truth we were owed from the start. At the heart of every confession lies a moment of undeniable reckoning, the instant when words long buried beneath silence and denial finally escape into the light. For Meghan Markle, that moment came at the age of 60, decades removed from her days as a newly minted duchess, far beyond the era when her every movement was splashed across tabloids and dissected by television pundits. Her voice was quieter now, aged by time and circumstance, but the impact of what she admitted carried the weight of a thunderclap. She said plainly that her pregnancies with Archie and Lilibet were never her own. She confessed that she had lied, that the babies were carried by surrogates, that the carefully staged photographs of rounded bumps and protective gestures were all part of an illusion crafted for the world's consumption. The honesty in that sentence cut deeper than years of speculation ever could. It was no longer rumor. It was no longer conspiracy theory. It was fact. The words themselves were brief, almost clinical in their simplicity, but the effect was monumental. I lied about my pregnancies, she admitted. They were surrogates. Just 6 words in the first part of that sentence and 4 in the second, yet those 10 words unraveled years of narrative, photo ops, and televised smiles. To understand why this confession matters, one must imagine the foundation of trust upon which her story had been built. Meghan had positioned herself not only as a modern duchess, but as a symbol of resilience, independence, and maternal strength. The image of her cradling her bump on royal tours, of Harry beaming beside her, of the palace announcing her pregnancies with a flourish, these moments cemented her place in history. To pull back the curtain and admit it was all fabrication is to admit the entire stage was designed to mislead. Why confess now? That is the first question observers asked. Meghan is no longer the young woman fighting for acceptance within the royal family, nor the middle-aged exile navigating life in California with her husband. At 60, her world looks different. Age changes not only the body but the mind. Regret sharpens. Secrets grow heavier. The urgency to cleanse one's legacy becomes stronger. For decades, she carried the burden of pretending, deflecting questions, and dismissing speculation. Perhaps she grew tired of the act. Perhaps she feared that the truth would leak from other sources and believed it better to seize control of the story. Or perhaps, in a moment of rare vulnerability, she simply no longer wished to lie. Whatever the motive, the timing of the confession feels deliberate. It comes at a stage of life when legacies are cemented, when history begins to write its final chapters. The confession also forces a reconsideration of Harry's role. Did he know from the beginning, or was he also a victim of the narrative she spun? Meghan's statement did not elaborate on his awareness, but the silence around his involvement raises as many questions as her admission itself. Harry stood beside her during those public appearances, his hand often resting protectively near hers, his smile radiating joy. If he knew the pregnancies were not real, his complicity makes him part of the deception. If he did not know, then the revelation paints him as a man manipulated even in the most intimate corners of his life. Meghan's confession, while focused on her, inevitably drags Harry into the shadows of suspicion. It is not just her legacy at stake, it is his as well. The confession reframes the years of public speculation that surrounded her. For a long time, the idea that Meghan wore fake bumps or staged her pregnancy photos was dismissed by mainstream outlets as cruelty. Those who voiced suspicions were labeled conspiracy theorists, trolls, or even racists motivated by prejudice rather than evidence. Meghan herself leaned into that framing, presenting herself as the target of relentless bullying. But now, with her own words confirming the substance of those suspicions, those once ridiculed voices feel vindicated. For them, the confession is not just personal truth, it is proof that they were right all along. This flips the narrative entirely. The critics who were demonized as irrational now find themselves on the side of truth, while Meghan, who positioned herself as the victim, becomes the architect of a carefully constructed lie. The language of confession matters as much as the content. By saying, "I lied," Meghan takes ownership of the deception rather than cloaking it in euphemisms. She did not say, "I misspoke, I presented things differently," or "I protected my privacy." She said she lied. That starkness makes the revelation impossible to downplay. It also suggests a deliberate desire to end speculation once and for all. In admitting outright deceit, she eliminates the wiggle room that public relations teams often leave open. She acknowledged what critics always accused her of and confirmed it in her own voice. The honesty, brutal as it is, leaves little room for doubt. What makes this moment even more significant is its validation of images and moments that seemed strange at the time. Viewers remember the footage where her belly appeared to fold awkwardly as she crouched down. They remember photos where her bump size seemed to fluctuate dramatically from one day to the next. They remember the endless hand cradling, the repeated attempts to draw attention to her belly, and the questions about why certain maternity choices seemed so unusual compared to other royals. Each of these details, once brushed off as obsessive nitpicking, now falls into place as part of a larger picture of deception. Meghan's confession retroactively reframes years of images. They are no longer moments of maternal pride, they are scenes in a performance. The confession also raises the question of whether the palace itself was complicit. Buckingham Palace never publicly corrected or clarified Meghan's pregnancy claims. They stood by the announcements, released photos, and allowed the world to believe. Did they know the truth and choose to remain silent for the sake of appearances? Or were they misled like everyone else? The monarchy thrives on stability and symbolism. Exposing such a scandal during the pregnancies could have been catastrophic for their image, particularly as Meghan and Harry were already sources of controversy. The palace may have calculated that silence was safer than confrontation, but in doing so, they allowed the deception to grow unchecked, leaving the public betrayed on both fronts. Emotionally, Meghan's confession is complex. Was she regretful? Relieved? Defiant? Accounts of her tone suggest a mix of exhaustion and candor, as though the weight of years had finally grown too heavy. There was no elaborate justification offered, no attempt to excuse her choices. She stated the fact plainly and left interpretation to others. This simplicity itself adds power to the admission. It forces the audience to grapple with the raw truth without distraction. The absence of explanation creates room for speculation about her motives, but it also denies the comfort of closure. The confession gives clarity about the pregnancies, but leaves unanswered the deeper question: why? For the public, the confession is more than gossip. It is a rupture in trust, a reminder of how easily narratives can be shaped and controlled by those in power. The royal family has long been seen as the pinnacle of public storytelling, crafting carefully curated images for centuries. But Meghan's story was different. She positioned herself as modern, authentic, relatable. Her confession shows that even those who claim transparency can weave illusions when it suits them. This realization cuts to the heart of how the public consumes stories of power and celebrity. It challenges the assumption that authenticity can ever be fully trusted in a world where image is currency. In the days following her admission, reactions poured in from across the globe. Some expressed outrage, accusing her of betraying the trust of millions. Others expressed sympathy, suggesting that her choice to use surrogates was not wrong, but that her decision to lie was her undoing. A smaller group praised her for finally telling the truth, however late it came. But regardless of opinion, one fact united all: the story was no longer rumor. It was confession. The debate shifted from whether Meghan faked her pregnancies to what her confession meant for her children, her marriage, her legacy, and the royal family itself. The lie had been exposed, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. This section of the story closes with the recognition that confession is both an ending and a beginning. For Meghan, it ended years of speculation and secrecy. For the world, it began a new chapter of analysis, judgment, and reflection. Her words cannot be unsaid. They hang in history now, etched alongside other royal scandals, perhaps surpassing them in their audacity. At 60 years old, Meghan Markle forced the world to reevaluate not only her story, but also the fragile line between truth and illusion in the lives of those who live in the spotlight. The confession is real, the lie is acknowledged, and the reckoning has only just begun. The seeds of speculation were sown almost as soon as Meghan Markle's pregnancy with Archie was announced. What should have been a universally celebrated moment quickly became one of the most analyzed and debated topics of modern royal history. The idea that a duchess might fake a pregnancy seemed, at first, absurd. Royal pregnancies had long been subjects of fascination, but never disbelief. Diana's pregnancies were tracked with excitement, and Kate Middleton's with admiration. With Meghan, however, things felt different from the beginning. The moment she stepped out cradling her belly during the royal tour in Australia, social media erupted not only with congratulations, but also with curiosity. Some viewers felt something was off. It wasn't just one photograph or one moment. It was a series of small inconsistencies that, when pieced together, formed the backbone of a theory that Meghan had never truly been pregnant. The earliest suspicions centered around what came to be known as the slipping bump incident. During one engagement, Meghan bent forward to pick something up, and her belly appeared to fold unnaturally. Video footage of this moment went viral, replayed in slow motion, dissected in YouTube videos, and frozen in frame-by-frame breakdowns. To skeptics, it was undeniable proof that what she wore was not a natural stomach, but a prosthetic bump. Defenders insisted it was nothing more than the fabric of her dress folding under pressure, a trick of light, or an unfortunate angle. Yet the image stuck. Once seen, it could not be unseen, and it became the cornerstone of early whispers. Then there was the issue of size fluctuation. In photographs taken just days apart, Meghan's belly seemed dramatically larger or smaller. In one picture, she appeared heavily pregnant. In another, noticeably less so. Doctors were interviewed in tabloids to explain how body shapes can look different depending on attire, posture, and angles. Fashion experts weighed in, blaming certain cuts of fabric. Yet for skeptics, these explanations were not enough. The changes appeared too drastic to be dismissed as optical illusions. They saw them instead as evidence that different prosthetic bumps were being used depending on the event. Hand placement became another point of contention. Meghan was photographed almost constantly with her hands on her stomach, cradling her bump with an intensity rarely seen in other royal pregnancies. While many interpreted this as a protective and loving gesture, critics viewed it differently. They argued it was excessive, deliberate, and theatrical. An overcompensation designed to draw attention to the bump and cement its authenticity in the eyes of the public. Memes began to circulate mocking her for the frequency of the gesture. Even neutral observers admitted it seemed excessive. What was once read as maternal pride soon became framed as a performance. Speculation was not confined to ordinary citizens alone. Online forums emerged where photographs were compared and scrutinized with forensic detail. These communities were labeled toxic by mainstream outlets, dismissed as conspiracy theorists feeding on each other's suspicions. But even among them, there were divisions. Some argued Meghan's use of a surrogate was a matter of personal choice and should not have been hidden. Others argued it was a betrayal of trust, an elaborate hoax designed to manipulate the public. What united them was the conviction that the pregnancies were not genuine. The arrival of Archie did not silence the doubts. His birth was announced in ways that only deepened suspicion. The secrecy around the hospital, the confusion over the timeline, the absence of traditional photo calls, all fueled theories. Unlike Diana and Kate, who both posed with their newborns outside the hospital for the world to see, Meghan chose a different path. Archie was introduced at Windsor Castle days after his birth, wrapped in a blanket, his face barely visible. The unusual handling of the introduction gave skeptics ammunition. Why avoid tradition if not to hide something? The palace insisted it was Meghan and Harry's choice to prioritize privacy, but the move backfired by stoking more speculation. By the time Meghan announced her second pregnancy, with Lilibet, the skepticism had hardened into certainty for many. The couple was living in the United States, far removed from the palace structure, yet the same patterns seemed to reappear. Carefully staged photographs, hand cradling, fluctuating belly sizes, all of it resurfaced. This time, social media scrutiny was even more intense, as communities had years to refine their analysis. Photographs released on Valentine's Day, styled as intimate and romantic, were immediately deconstructed by those convinced the scene was staged. And when Lilibet's birth announcement came with little detail and limited photographic evidence, the theories only multiplied. Mainstream media was caught between reporting public curiosity and maintaining credibility. Most outlets avoided giving credence to the surrogacy rumors, instead portraying them as fringe conspiracies driven by Meghan's detractors. Articles often highlighted the cruelty of questioning a woman's pregnancy, framing it as misogynistic or racist. Meghan herself seemed to benefit from this framing, as criticism of her bump was deflected into discussions about how unfairly she was treated compared to other royals. Yet beneath the surface, the whispers continued. Videos dissecting her appearances racked up millions of views on YouTube. Hashtags related to fake pregnancies trended on Twitter. The narrative refused to die, no matter how often it was dismissed. Why did these suspicions take such a strong hold? Part of the reason lies in Meghan herself. From the moment she entered the royal family, she was polarizing. Admirers saw her as a breath of fresh air, a woman breaking barriers in an ancient institution. Critics saw her as calculating, manipulative, and obsessed with image. The pregnancy controversies fit neatly into the latter narrative. To those who distrusted her, the idea that she would fake a pregnancy for attention or control seemed plausible. It confirmed what they already believed about her character. Thus, every inconsistency became proof of deceit. The public's perception of Meghan acted as a lens through which her pregnancy was scrutinized, amplifying doubts. Another factor was the uniqueness of her choices compared to royal precedent. Diana and Kate adhered to tradition, posing with their newborns in ways that signaled transparency. Meghan broke that tradition, whether out of personal preference or genuine desire for privacy. But in breaking from expectation, she created a void into which suspicion rushed. The lack of transparency, combined with unusual photographs and behaviors, built a foundation for conspiracy to thrive. Without definitive proof to silence speculation, the doubts endured. The speculation was not confined to the pregnancies themselves, but extended into the symbolism of motherhood. Meghan often spoke about her desire to be a mother, about the joy and fulfillment it brought her. Interviews highlighted her maternal instincts, and photographs captured her nurturing gestures. If those pregnancies were staged, critics argued, then the entire narrative of Meghan as the glowing, proud mother was built on artifice. It was not simply a question of biology, it was a question of authenticity. Was the woman who claimed to be a symbol of modern motherhood really living a lie? At the height of the speculation, palace officials were silent. They neither confirmed nor denied, leaving the public to argue among themselves. This silence was strategic, designed to protect the dignity of the monarchy by refusing to dignify rumors. Yet the absence of a strong denial only added to the fire. People asked, if the rumors were truly baseless, why not shut them down decisively? The vacuum of information created room for theories to grow unchecked. And Meghan herself, instead of directly addressing the suspicions, often reframed criticism as evidence of bullying, sidestepping the central question. To those already convinced, her evasions felt like confirmation. When Meghan finally confessed decades later, all of these early suspicions were validated. The viral videos, the forum debates, the mocked memes. All were reframed as foresight rather than cruelty. The people who had been dismissed as conspiracy theorists now found themselves vindicated. What began as whispers had become history. The early speculation had not been fringe paranoia, but an accurate reading of subtle cues. And in that validation lies the true power of the confession. It rewrote years of narrative, shifting perception from ridicule to revelation. The speculation phase of the story represents the middle ground between illusion and confession. It is the bridge that connects Meghan's carefully staged image with the eventual truth she admitted. It shows how even the most carefully crafted illusions can be undone not by official statements, but by the persistence of public observation. In an age where every frame can be analyzed, every inconsistency magnified, deception becomes nearly impossible to maintain forever. The whispers that began in 2018 did not fade. They grew louder, stronger, more insistent, until the confession decades later confirmed them. The early suspicions, once mocked, now stand as a testament to the power of curiosity and doubt in uncovering truth. The role of the palace in Meghan Markle's pregnancies, or rather the portrayal of them, remains one of the most pressing and complex aspects of this entire story. To understand the weight of her confession, one must first examine how Buckingham Palace managed the narrative during those crucial years. The monarchy is not simply a family. It is an institution built on image, ceremony, and carefully orchestrated public relations. Every detail, from the wording of official statements to the timing of photo releases, is considered through the lens of tradition and stability. When Meghan's pregnancies were announced, the palace machinery went into motion as it always had. But what they knew, when they knew it, and how they chose to handle it, is a story that raises more questions than answers. The official announcement of Meghan's first pregnancy came in October 2018 during a royal tour of Australia, Fiji, Tonga, and New Zealand. The timing was deliberate. Announcing the news at the start of an overseas tour ensured wall-to-wall media coverage, with photographs of Meghan and Harry surrounded by cheering crowds doubling as coverage of the supposed new royal baby. The palace statement was brief but celebratory, highlighting the couple's excitement and the joy shared by the entire family. No one in the official narrative hinted at anything unusual. On the surface, it was a textbook royal announcement. But behind the scenes, was the palace fully aware of the reality? Or were they themselves caught up in a deception staged by Meghan and Harry? Those close to palace operations at the time have long suggested that Meghan was a divisive figure within the institution. Her approach was unconventional, often clashing with the traditions the monarchy depended upon. From wardrobe choices to staff management, she was seen as someone who did not conform easily. Within that atmosphere, it is conceivable that her pregnancy was treated as another area where she sought control. If Meghan insisted she was pregnant and wished the palace to announce it, would anyone within the institution have dared to push back? The monarchy has always relied on unity. Public disagreement among family members is avoided at all costs. To challenge Meghan's narrative would have been to create open conflict at a time when the world's eyes were watching. Silence and compliance may have seemed the safer option. The palace's role becomes even more complicated when examining how Meghan's pregnancies differed from those of other royal women. When Princess Diana gave birth, the world was informed in real time, with photographers stationed outside the hospital. The same was true for Kate Middleton, who presented each of her 3 children to the public mere hours after their births. These moments were not only traditions, but also demonstrations of transparency, proof that the future heirs were born as claimed. Meghan's approach broke sharply with that precedent. With Archie, there was no immediate photo call outside a hospital. Instead, his introduction was staged days later at Windsor Castle, with carefully chosen photographs released to the press. The palace defended this as a personal choice by Harry and Meghan to protect their privacy. Yet the break from tradition was glaring, and it raised eyebrows across the media. For those already suspicious, the palace's defense looked less like protection of privacy and more like protection of a lie. Silence became the palace's default strategy. They did not publicly acknowledge the rumors about fake bumps or surrogacy. They did not issue strong denials or attempt to quash speculation. Instead, they ignored the chatter and stuck to the script. This silence has now taken on new meaning in light of Meghan's confession. If they knew the truth, then the silence was complicity. They allowed the public to believe in a pregnancy that never happened, protecting the image of the Sussexes for reasons we may never fully understand. If they did not know, then the silence was negligence. They failed to investigate and confirm the truth, choosing instead to let appearances dictate reality. In either case, the result is the same. The public was misled, and the palace was part of that process. Harry's role complicates matters further, because as a senior member of the royal family, his choices inevitably reflected back on the institution. If he knew the pregnancies were fabricated, then the palace was protecting not only Meghan but also Harry, who would have been complicit in deceiving the monarchy and the public. If he did not know, then the palace allowed one of their own to stand on the world stage as a participant in a lie. Both scenarios undermine the credibility of the institution. Trust in the monarchy depends on its ability to maintain dignity and truth, even amidst scandal. Allowing such a falsehood to stand for years chips away at that trust. Inside Buckingham Palace, image management has always been paramount. For decades, they have weathered scandals by controlling the narrative. Carefully crafted statements, timed photographs, and a reliance on the press's willingness to uphold tradition. Meghan's pregnancies fit into that framework, but they also exposed its limitations. No amount of polished press releases could contain the suspicions that arose when videos and photos circulated online. The digital age meant that the palace could no longer rely solely on its own voice to shape reality. Ordinary citizens with smartphones and social media accounts could dissect details in ways that no institution could suppress. The palace's silence in the face of speculation, once an effective strategy, now looked like avoidance. Behind closed doors, it is likely the palace debated how to handle the rumors. Publicly addressing them might have dignified what they considered fringe theories, giving them legitimacy. Yet doing nothing allowed the theories to grow unchecked. With Meghan's confession, that strategy now appears disastrous. Their refusal to speak out gave Meghan cover for her lie, while simultaneously leaving the monarchy vulnerable to accusations of complicity. By prioritizing image over truth, the palace ended up entangled in a deception that may haunt its legacy for decades. The second pregnancy with Lilibet only deepened the palace's dilemma. By this time, Meghan and Harry had stepped back from royal duties and relocated to California. They were no longer bound by palace structures, yet their announcement was still tied to the monarchy through lineage. Lilibet was not just Meghan's child. She was the granddaughter of the future king. Questions about legitimacy, succession, and titles became unavoidable. The palace again maintained silence, offering congratulations and treating the pregnancy as fact. This silence, in hindsight, is even more damning. With less direct control over the Sussexes' actions, the palace had little leverage. But by endorsing the announcement without scrutiny, they once again enabled the continuation of the narrative. The role of the palace cannot be understated because it speaks to the very heart of monarchy as an institution. The monarchy thrives on perception. It is not elected, it does not function as a government, and its power is largely symbolic. That symbolism is rooted in trust. The public believes in the continuity of the crown, in the traditions that have endured for centuries. To mislead the public about something as fundamental as a royal birth is to undermine that trust. Whether the palace knowingly participated or simply failed to act, the result is the same, a betrayal of the public's faith. Even today, long after the confession, questions linger. Did senior royals such as Queen Elizabeth, Prince Charles, or Prince William know the truth at the time? If so, what conversations took place behind palace doors? Did they debate whether to intervene, only to decide that protecting the family's image was more important than revealing the truth? Or were they blindsided, forced to smile for cameras alongside Meghan while suspecting, or knowing, something was amiss? The answers to these questions may never be known, but the speculation adds another layer of intrigue to the scandal. In the broader context of royal history, the the palace has faced many crises. Abdications, divorces, affairs, scandals involving finances and politics. Yet few scandals cut as deeply as this one. An abdication is a choice. An affair is a private failing. A financial misstep can be corrected. But a deception about birth strikes at the core of royal legitimacy. The line of succession depends on trust in the authenticity of lineage. To allow that to be questioned, or worse, to allow it to be fabricated, risks the very stability of the monarchy itself. The palace's silence, once seen as a dignified refusal to engage in gossip, now looks like negligence at best and collusion at worst. Meghan's confession has forced a re-evaluation of those years, casting a long shadow over the decisions made by palace officials and senior royals alike. It is not only Meghan who must answer for the lie. It is the institution that allowed the lie to stand unchallenged. And in that sense, the role of the palace is as central to this story as Meghan herself. The confession may have been hers, but the silence was theirs. And together, they created a deception that will echo through history as one of the monarchy's darkest chapters. The palace's silence, once seen as a dignified refusal to engage in gossip, now looks like negligence at best and collusion at worst. Meghan's confession has forced a re-evaluation of those years, casting a long shadow over the decisions made by palace officials and senior royals alike. It is not only Meghan who must answer for the lie. It is the institution that allowed the lie to stand unchallenged. And in that sense, the role of the palace is as central to this story as Meghan herself. The confession may have been hers, but the silence was theirs. And together, they created a deception that will echo through history as one of the monarchy's darkest chapters. When analyzing Meghan Markle's confession, one cannot ignore the shadow it casts over Prince Harry. His place in this story is as important as Meghan's, because whether knowingly or unknowingly, he was the man standing beside her throughout every public appearance, every announcement, and every photo op. The world saw him as the devoted husband, cradling his wife's bump with pride, speaking warmly about fatherhood, and defending his family against the harsh glare of the press. But Meghan's revelation that both pregnancies were lies forces us to ask, what was Harry's role in all of this? Did he know from the beginning, and therefore become complicit in the deception? Or was he, too, manipulated into standing as a prop in a performance he did not fully understand? The answer to this question will shape not only how history views Meghan, but how it views Harry's legacy as well. To start with, Harry has always been portrayed as a man deeply affected by the trauma of his mother's death. Diana's passing shaped his worldview, his distrust of the press, and his desire to protect his loved ones from the scrutiny that destroyed her. When Meghan announced her pregnancy, Harry's joy appeared genuine. He spoke of his excitement to be a father, often referencing how much he wished his mother could have been there to see it. These statements now raise difficult questions. If he knew the pregnancies were false, then those words were part of the same deception Meghan orchestrated. If he did not know, then the confession turns them into tragic evidence of a man deceived even within the intimacy of his own marriage. Both interpretations are deeply troubling. Public perception of Harry has always been tied to his image as Diana's son, the troubled but relatable prince who sought love and family outside the rigid structures of monarchy. When he married Meghan, many saw it as a sign that he had found stability, that he was ready to build the family he had longed for since childhood. The pregnancies seemed to confirm this. The image of Harry and Meghan cradling their newborn, presenting Archie to the world, was meant to be the culmination of that narrative. With Meghan's confession, however, that image now looks staged. The story of the boy who lost his mother and built a family of his own has been undercut by the revelation that the pregnancies central to it were fabricated. For those who idolized Harry as a symbol of resilience, the confession undermines their faith in him. If Harry knew the truth all along, it means he was an active participant in deceiving not only the public, but also his family. Imagine the conversations behind palace walls if senior royals suspected or even knew about the surrogates. Harry would have been the one bridging Meghan's story with the institution, insisting on the legitimacy of the pregnancies. His loyalty to his wife may have driven him to protect her narrative at all costs, even if it meant lying to his grandmother, his father, and his brother. Such a choice would place him in direct opposition to the values of the monarchy, which depends on authenticity in matters of lineage. Complicity in this lie would not simply be marital devotion. It would be a betrayal of the very institution into which he was born. On the other hand, if Harry was unaware, the implications are equally damning. It would mean that he was kept in the dark about one of the most significant aspects of his own life, the pregnancies of his children. To stand beside Meghan at every event, to smile at every camera, and to speak publicly about becoming a father, all while believing it to be true, would make him one of the most tragic figures in modern royal history. The notion that a man so close to the heart of the story could be ignorant of its reality paints him as naive, manipulated, and powerless within his own marriage. It raises uncomfortable questions about the dynamics between Harry and Meghan, and whether his devotion blinded him to truths others were quick to suspect. Harry's complicity, whether intentional or accidental, also plays into the public's perception of his credibility. Since stepping back from royal duties, Harry has positioned himself as a truth-teller, someone willing to expose the realities of royal life. His memoir, interviews, and public statements have all leaned heavily on the theme of honesty against institutional secrecy. But Meghan's confession undermines that position. How can a man who presented himself as committed to truth be tied to such a fundamental lie? If he knew, his credibility is shattered. If he did not, his judgment is called into question. Either way, the confession destabilizes the foundation of his public persona. The impact on his relationship with the royal family cannot be overstated. Harry's bond with William was already strained by the time Archie and Lilibet entered the picture. Meghan's confession will only deepen those fractures. William, who has spent his life preparing for kingship, understands better than anyone the importance of legitimacy. To discover that his brother's children were born under a deception not only casts doubt on Meghan, but also on Harry himself. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to restore. For Charles, now king, the confession casts a shadow over his legacy. His son, once seen as the embodiment of modern monarchy, is revealed to have been entangled in deceit. The royal family has survived many scandals, but few strike at the heart of its symbolic authority as deeply as questions about birth and lineage. Harry is now inseparably linked to that scandal. There is also the question of how this affects Harry's children. Regardless of the pregnancies, Archie and Lilibet are his. He is their father, and his love for them has been evident. Yet the way they entered the world is now a matter of public debate. For Harry, this creates a painful dilemma. To defend his children's place in history, he must confront the lie their mother perpetuated and the role he played in it. Silence is no longer an option, yet speaking risks deepening the wound. The confession puts him in a position where every choice carries consequence, not just for him, but for his children's future. Harry's defenders will argue that his role, whatever it was born of love and loyalty. To stand by Meghan, even in deception, can be seen as the ultimate act of devotion. In this interpretation, Harry is not a deceiver but a man protecting his wife from the cruelty of a world that scrutinized her at every turn. But his critics will argue the opposite, that loyalty to a lie is still betrayal. They will say that Harry's first loyalty should have been to truth, to the monarchy, and to the people who trusted him. The tension between these two views ensures that Harry's role in this scandal will be debated for years to come. Ultimately, Harry's position in Meghan's confession is tragic. Whether complicit or ignorant, he is tarnished by association. His story, once framed as the fairy tale of a prince escaping tradition to find happiness, is now clouded by questions of honesty and judgment. Meghan's words may have been her own, but their impact lands heavily on him. His life has always been shaped by the tension between image and reality, between the boy grieving his mother and the man trying to protect his family. Meghan's confession ensures that this tension will define his legacy as much as hers. The public may never know exactly what Harry knew or when he knew it, but the suspicion will remain. And in the world of royalty, suspicion is almost as damaging as certainty. Harry's role, therefore, is not just a subplot. It is central to the entire narrative. Meghan confessed, but Harry stood beside her through it all. His silence during those years, his smiles for the cameras, his words of excitement, are now part of a story that history will judge harshly. Whether as accomplice or as victim, Harry is bound to Meghan's confession inextricably. And as the world continues to dissect the truth, it is Harry's position, his knowledge, his choices, his loyalty, that will determine whether he is remembered as a protector, a pawn, or a partner in deception. The moment Meghan Markle confessed, the immediate response was an earthquake that rippled across continents. Public reaction was not a single voice but a chorus of shock, outrage, vindication, and even, in some corners, sympathy. For decades, the debate over her pregnancies had been a dividing line. Supporters dismissed any doubt as cruel conspiracy, while skeptics insisted the inconsistencies were too glaring to ignore. With her words confirming the suspicions, those divisions erupted into something far louder. The world did not simply hear her confession. It reacted with an intensity that revealed just how deeply people had invested in her story. Social media was the first arena where the explosion unfolded. Within minutes of her statement being reported, hashtags trended across platforms. On Twitter, phrases like "she lied," "royal surrogates," and "we were right" dominated the global conversation. Memes that once mocked Meghan's constant cradling of her belly resurfaced, but this time they were framed as evidence rather than ridicule. TikTok creators stitched together old clips of the infamous slipping bump and juxtaposed them with Meghan's confession. YouTube channels that had spent years analyzing her appearances gained millions of new views as people revisited their content, now eager to rewatch what had once been dismissed. On Instagram, side-by-side collages of Meghan's fluctuating belly sizes were posted with captions like, "History has vindicated us." For those who had been silenced or shamed for questioning her story, the confession was a moment of triumph. Yet not everyone reacted with celebration. Many supporters felt betrayed, not just by Meghan, but by the years they had spent defending her against critics. For them, the confession was a personal wound. They had framed Meghan as a victim of harassment, a woman unfairly targeted because of her race and her outsider status within the monarchy. They had stood by her through accusations, mocking those who dared to question her. To hear her confirm that she lied meant they, too, had been deceived. Their faith in her was shaken, and for some, permanently broken. On fan forums and comment threads, longtime admirers expressed disillusionment, admitting they felt foolish for having believed her so strongly. It was not just Meghan's image that collapsed. It was the community of supporters who had built themselves around defending her. The generational divide in reactions was striking. Older royal watchers, who had lived through decades of tradition and precedent, saw Meghan's confession as confirmation that she had never respected the monarchy's values. To them, it was proof that she was always an outsider trying to bend the institution to her will. They contrasted her deception with the transparency of Diana and Kate, women who endured the same public scrutiny but never resorted to elaborate illusions. Younger audiences, however, responded with a more nuanced perspective. Some argued that the use of surrogates should never have been the scandal, that the lie was the problem, not the method of becoming a parent. They saw Meghan's confession as a missed opportunity, a moment where she could have broken barriers by speaking openly about alternative paths to motherhood. Instead, she chose deception, and in doing so, created the very stigma she might have shattered. For them, the tragedy was not the surrogacy itself, but the dishonesty that accompanied it. The media, too, reacted swiftly and ferociously. Tabloids that had once splashed her smiling bump across their front pages now ran headlines like "Decades of Lies" and "Duchess of Deception." Talk show hosts replayed her most famous pregnancy appearances with commentary dripping in irony. Newspapers that had previously dismissed surrogacy rumors as fringe gossip began publishing retrospectives on how they had missed the signs. Some journalists admitted, candidly, that they had always suspected but lacked the proof to report it. Others expressed regret for having ridiculed the skeptics. This shift in tone was perhaps the most telling. Where once the mainstream press had shielded Meghan by branding her critics as conspiracists, they now embraced those same narratives as fact. The confession had not only exposed Meghan's lie, it had exposed the media's complicity in silencing dissent. Public intellectuals and commentators weighed in, each with their own spin. Some framed the confession as a morality tale about the dangers of celebrity culture, where image triumphs over authenticity. Others saw it as a reflection of the palace's failures, arguing that if Meghan had felt supported by the monarchy, she might not have resorted to deception. Feminist voices were divided. Some argued that Meghan's use of surrogates should have been respected as her private choice, but lying about it harmed women by reinforcing stigma around alternative methods of childbirth. Others condemned her outright, saying she had exploited the image of pregnancy for sympathy and attention, while real mothers endured the struggles she pretended to face. The debate spilled into every corner of cultural commentary, making Meghan's confession not just a royal scandal, but a societal conversation about truth, motherhood, and trust. For those who had always doubted her, the reaction was one of vindication bordering on glee. Online communities dedicated to analyzing Meghan's every move erupted in celebration. Threads filled with comments like, "We told you so," and finally, the truth. Some users revisited old posts from years earlier, resurfacing screenshots of their predictions and claiming victory. They saw themselves not as conspiracists, but as truth-seekers who had endured ridicule for being right too soon. The confession validated their persistence, and they embraced it with fervor. To them, Meghan's admission was not just a personal scandal. It was proof that mainstream narratives can collapse under the weight of observation and scrutiny. The outrage, however, was just as loud. For many, the lie felt unforgivable. This was not a minor detail of her life, but a deception about something fundamental: the birth of children who carry royal titles. Critics argued that by lying, Meghan undermined the legitimacy of her children's place in royal history. While the use of surrogates is not inherently scandalous, the secrecy surrounding it transformed it into one. Trust, once broken, is hard to restore, and Meghan's confession shattered it entirely. Anger poured in from commentators who felt she had manipulated not only the public, but also her own children's stories. They asked how Archie and Lilibet would feel knowing the story of their births had been wrapped in deceit. They questioned how Meghan could preach about authenticity and empowerment while living a lie for decades. The global scale of the reaction underscored Meghan's cultural significance. In the United States, where she had often been framed as a victim of British tabloid cruelty, the confession landed with particular force. American audiences, who had rallied to her defense during the Oprah interview, now grappled with the realization that she had not been entirely honest. In the United Kingdom, where suspicion of her was always higher, the confession confirmed what many had believed for years. The divide between American and British perceptions of Meghan, long a defining feature of her story, began to collapse under the weight of a truth that neither side could ignore. Her confession was not about national bias or cultural framing. It was about reality. For the public at large, the confession sparked introspection about trust in figures of power and influence. Meghan had been one of the most visible women in the world, her image carefully cultivated to symbolize progress, diversity, and modernity within the monarchy. By lying about something so central, she forced the world to question how much of what they see in public figures is ever real. This doubt extended beyond Meghan. It became a conversation about politicians, celebrities, and influencers who craft images for public consumption. Meghan's scandal was specific, but the questions it raised were universal. Who can we believe, and how much of what we are told is performance? In the weeks that followed, the intensity of the reaction did not fade. Documentaries revisited her pregnancies, news outlets ran exposés on the timeline of events, and commentators debated the ethics of deception. Meghan's confession had become more than a personal scandal. It was a cultural flashpoint, forcing society to grapple with issues of truth, authenticity, and the power of narrative. Public reaction was not uniform, but it was unanimous in one sense. No one could ignore it. Meghan's words had struck too deep, challenging not only her own image but also the public's willingness to trust what they are told. And in that, the confession did more than validate years of speculation. It redefined the relationship between public figures and the audiences who believe in them. When a scandal of this magnitude erupts, it rarely stays confined to the individuals at its center. Meghan Markle's confession spilled into the broader world of media and celebrity commentary almost instantly. Talk show hosts, entertainment journalists, cultural critics, and even other celebrities weighed in on the revelation. The effect was a firestorm of opinion, analysis, and, in some cases, outright ridicule. For years, public figures had stood by Meghan, defending her against relentless tabloid scrutiny and accusations. Others had been more skeptical, privately questioning aspects of her story, but never daring to say so publicly. Her admission that she lied about carrying Archie and Lilibet forced every one of those voices to respond. The stage was no longer the palace or the Sussexes' home in California. It was the global platform of celebrity culture where silence could no longer be maintained. Television talk shows led the charge. In the United States, late-night hosts opened their monologues with biting commentary. Old clips of Meghan and Harry's interviews were replayed, juxtaposed with her recent confession. Punchlines focused on the slipping bump video, the obsessive belly cradling, and the carefully staged maternity shoots that now looked like props in a play. The tone ranged from sarcastic disbelief to outright mockery. These moments mattered because Meghan and Harry had once used these very platforms to craft their narrative. They had sat across from Oprah Winfrey, pouring out grievances about palace life, painting themselves as truth-tellers against an oppressive system. Now those same platforms turned the spotlight back on them, exposing the contradiction between their message of honesty and the reality of deception. In the United Kingdom, the commentary carried a sharper edge. Tabloid columnists and royal correspondents, many of whom had been accused of cruelty toward Meghan in the past, felt vindicated. Columns declared that the truth had finally caught up with her. One headline read, "Duchess of Deception exposed at last," while another asked, what else did she lie about? The British press, long accused by Meghan of harassment and bias, reveled in the reversal. For years, they had been portrayed as villains in her story. Now, they framed her as the villain in theirs. The confession gave them ammunition to rewrite the narrative, shifting blame back onto Meghan while absolving themselves of charges of unfairness. Perhaps most striking was the reaction from celebrities who had once defended Meghan. Oprah, who had given Meghan and Harry their most high-profile platform, faced uncomfortable questions. Her interview had been framed as groundbreaking, a moment where Meghan and Harry revealed the truth about their struggles. Now, with Meghan admitting to such a fundamental lie, critics asked what else might have been misrepresented. Oprah's silence in the immediate aftermath was telling. Supporters who had once amplified Meghan's message began to distance themselves, choosing either silence or carefully worded statements about the importance of truth and healing. This distancing was not accidental. Celebrities protect their own brands, and Meghan's confession was toxic enough to tarnish anyone too closely tied to her. Other public figures, however, were less cautious. Talk show hosts in Britain and Australia, long known for their critical stance on the Sussexes, seized the opportunity to openly ridicule Meghan. Some brought body language experts onto their programs to analyze old footage of Meghan cradling her stomach. Others replayed clips of Harry speaking about fatherhood, framing him as either complicit or pitifully naive. These segments blurred the line between news and entertainment, but they reflected the broader cultural mood. Meghan's confession was no longer just a royal story. It was a spectacle, a piece of entertainment fodder for late-night punchlines and daytime debates. The commentary also extended into the world of experts. Psychologists were interviewed about why someone might feel compelled to fake pregnancies. They spoke about control, the pressure of public scrutiny, and the fear of judgment for using surrogates. Media analysts discussed the power of image in the modern age, pointing out how Meghan had weaponized photographs and public appearances to construct a reality that was never true. These expert voices gave the scandal an added layer of seriousness, framing it not just as gossip, but as a case study in celebrity culture, deception, and public trust. The celebrity reactions themselves revealed much about Meghan's position in global culture. For years, she had drawn sympathy from Hollywood circles, where many admired her as an outsider who challenged an archaic institution. Friends like Tyler Perry, who provided her with shelter when she and Harry first left the United Kingdom, had once been outspoken in her defense. With her confession, however, those same figures faced a dilemma. Publicly defending her now risked aligning themselves with dishonesty. Publicly condemning her risked looking disloyal. Many chose silence, but silence in celebrity culture often speaks louder than words. The absence of defense was itself a sign of how damaging her admission had been. Media outlets also used the confession as an opportunity to re-examine their own coverage. Documentaries that had once painted Meghan as a victim were re-aired with added disclaimers or updated commentary. Opinion writers admitted that the press, in its eagerness to frame Meghan as a target of bullying, may have overlooked legitimate questions. This self-reflection was rare in an industry often reluctant to admit mistakes, but it underscored just how seismic Meghan's confession was. It forced the media to confront its own role in amplifying her narrative without sufficient scrutiny. One of the most telling aspects of the celebrity and media reaction was the speed with which Meghan shifted from admired to mocked. In the world of fame, reputation is fragile. A single revelation can undo years of carefully cultivated image. Meghan's brand had always been built on authenticity, resilience, and truth-telling. By admitting to a lie, she stripped away the very foundation of her public persona. What remained was not just a duchess who had deceived the world, but a celebrity who had undermined the trust of her audience. For someone who relied heavily on media platforms to tell her story, that loss of credibility was catastrophic. The reaction also highlighted the power of collective memory. Every photograph of Meghan cradling her stomach, every clip of her smiling at public events, every interview where she spoke about motherhood, these moments resurfaced with new meaning. What had once been celebrated as tender and maternal was now ridiculed as staged and theatrical. The same images that built her brand were now dismantling it. In the age of digital archives, nothing disappears. The confession retroactively rewrote years of coverage, making Meghan appear less as a victim of scrutiny and more as the architect of an elaborate performance. Beyond the ridicule, however, there were voices that sought to bring nuance to the conversation. Some commentators argued that Meghan's lie, while damaging, reflected the immense pressure she faced as a member of the royal family. They pointed out that surrogacy, though increasingly accepted, still carries stigma, particularly in elite circles where tradition and biology are prized. From this perspective, Meghan's decision to lie was not born of malice, but of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of exclusion, fear of appearing weak or inadequate. These voices did not excuse her deception, but they framed it as a human failing rather than a calculated scheme. This interpretation provided some space for empathy, though it remained a minority view in the louder chorus of condemnation. In the end, the celebrity and media reaction underscored the dual nature of Meghan's confession. On one hand, it validated years of suspicion and provided endless material for mockery and criticism. On the other, it forced society to confront uncomfortable questions about truth, image, and the pressures faced by public figures. Meghan became both the deceiver and the cautionary tale, a figure whose downfall revealed as much about the world that consumed her as it did about her choices. The media, once her ally and then her enemy, now framed her as both villain and victim, exploiting her confession for ratings and clicks while simultaneously condemning her for providing the material. For Meghan, the reaction from celebrities and the media marked a turning point. She was no longer a symbol of defiance against the monarchy or a champion of authenticity. She was a woman whose lie had been exposed, whose allies had grown silent, and whose critics had grown louder. The confession did not just end years of speculation. It ended her credibility in the eyes of many. And as the world watched celebrities, journalists, and commentators dissect her every word, one truth became clear. Once the illusion was shattered, there was no putting it back together. The media that had once elevated her now ensured that her fall would be remembered just as vividly. When Meghan Markle admitted that her pregnancies had been a fabrication, the confession did not simply affect her or Harry. At the very center of the story stood Archie and Lilibet, the two children whose very existence had been shrouded in years of speculation, mystery, and now confirmed deception. The children, innocent of the choices made by their parents, became unwilling symbols in one of the most controversial chapters of royal history. The impact of Meghan's words on them cannot be overstated, because this revelation will follow them for the rest of their lives, shaping not only how the world views them, but also how they view themselves. From the beginning, Archie's birth was handled differently than any royal child before him. Unlike William and Kate, who presented their children outside the hospital in front of cheering crowds, Harry and Meghan introduced Archie at Windsor Castle, days after his supposed birth. Even in that moment, suspicions were rampant. The baby was tightly swaddled, his features barely visible, and the event was staged with fewer photographers and less transparency than tradition dictated. Meghan and Harry framed the decision as their way of protecting their child from the media frenzy, but critics saw it as further evidence that something was being hidden. Now, with Meghan admitting that she had never been pregnant, those doubts are validated. The secrecy surrounding Archie's introduction makes sense only in hindsight. It was not privacy, but concealment. For Archie himself, the confession changes the story of his life. The narrative he grew up with, that his mother carried him, that he was part of a history-making pregnancy, has been rewritten. He will one day read the headlines and watch the videos that dissect every detail of his existence. He will see his mother's belly analyzed frame by frame, his introduction scrutinized, and his legitimacy questioned. Even though none of this is his fault, he will bear the weight of a deception that shaped his very identity. Questions about his place in the royal family, about whether his birth adhered to tradition, and about how much of his life story was manipulated will linger with him for decades. Lilibet's story is even more complicated, as she was born after Harry and Meghan had already stepped back from royal duties. Her very name tied her directly to the monarchy, honoring Queen Elizabeth with the affectionate nickname Lilibet. From the beginning, there were debates about whether the Queen approved of the name, and whether it was appropriate for Meghan and Harry, who had distanced themselves from royal duties, to bestow such a title. With Meghan's confession, those debates take on new meaning. The child who was named in honor of the monarch was born into a deception that strikes at the monarchy's core values. For Lilibet, this creates a paradox. She carries a name rooted in royal tradition, yet her birth is forever linked to a scandal that undermined it. The question of legitimacy looms large. In the monarchy, lineage and authenticity are not simply personal matters. They are matters of state. Every royal birth is recorded, documented, and celebrated because it ties directly to the continuity of the crown. For Archie and Lilibet, Meghan's lie casts a shadow over their place in that lineage. While the use of surrogates does not erase their biological connection to Harry, the secrecy surrounding it invites scrutiny. Skeptics argue that their legitimacy as royal children has been compromised, while defenders insist that their innocence should shield them from such debates. Yet history is often less forgiving. The record will always show that their mother lied about their births, and that stain will be attached to their names. Beyond questions of legitimacy, there is the human impact of growing up in the aftermath of such a confession. Both children will face a world that knows their story before they do. Schoolmates, peers, and the public at large will reference the scandal as part of their identity. They will be compared endlessly to other royal children, particularly William and Kate's offspring, whose births adhered to tradition and transparency. For Archie and Lilibet, the burden of being defined by their parents' choices will be immense. Even if they choose to live private lives away from the spotlight, the story will follow them, because it is part of the public record. The reaction to Meghan's confession also highlighted how society views children born through surrogacy. Many voices pointed out that surrogacy itself should not be scandalous, that countless families around the world use it to build loving homes. The scandal lay not in the method but in the lie. Had Meghan been honest from the beginning, the narrative might have been one of progress, breaking stigmas, and modernizing the monarchy. Instead, by choosing deception, she ensured that her children's story would be tainted. They were not symbols of progress, but of scandal. This distinction matters deeply, because it shapes not only how the public sees Archie and Lilibet, but how they will come to see themselves. The royal family's silence complicates matters further. By endorsing the pregnancies at the time, by offering congratulations, and playing along with the narrative, the monarchy itself became complicit in the lie. This complicity now impacts Archie and Lilibet directly. Were they protected, or were they pawns in a larger game of image management? The answer to that question will affect how the children understand their place within both their immediate family and the institution of monarchy. It is possible that one day they will resent the choices made on their behalf, feeling that their identities were manipulated to serve the needs of adults who valued image over honesty. The global reaction to Meghan's confession also ensured that Archie and Lilibet will not be able to escape the scrutiny. Their names trended across social media, even though they themselves had done nothing to warrant attention. Photographs of them resurfaced, analyzed for any sign of resemblance to Meghan or Harry, as though to confirm their biological origins. This invasive curiosity, while unfair, is inevitable given the circumstances. Their very existence has become a topic of public debate, and their identities are entangled with questions of truth and deception. For children who might have hoped to grow up with some measure of privacy, the confession destroyed that possibility. Archie and Lilibet's futures will be shaped by choices that lie outside their control. Whether they embrace their royal heritage or reject it, whether they pursue public lives or private ones, the story of their births will remain central to how they are perceived. Some may admire them for rising above the scandal, for refusing to be defined by their parents' deception. Others may always see them as products of a lie. Their lives will be a test case in how much agency individuals truly have when born into stories larger than themselves. In this sense, they are heirs not only to royal blood but to a legacy of scandal that they did not choose. The tragedy of Archie and Lilibet's position is that they are blameless. They did not choose surrogacy, nor did they choose to be born into deception. They are innocent victims of decisions made by adults who prioritize control over transparency. Yet innocence does not protect them from consequence. History will always record their births as part of a scandal that shook the monarchy, and that record will follow them wherever they go. The challenge for them will be to carve out identities that transcend the narrative imposed upon them. Whether they succeed or not, their lives will be inseparably tied to Meghan's confession. In the broader arc of this story, Archie and Lilibet represent both the most human and the most symbolic dimension. On a human level, they are children whose stories have been manipulated, who will grow up under the shadow of their parents' decisions. On a symbolic level, they embody the stakes of legitimacy, truth, and deception within the monarchy. Their lives are no longer just personal journeys. They are public case studies in how lies ripple through generations. For Meghan, confessing the truth may have lifted a personal burden, but for her children, it placed a new one squarely on their shoulders. They are the true inheritors of this scandal, and their future will determine whether Meghan's deception remains a wound or becomes a cautionary tale with the possibility of redemption. When Meghan Markle revealed that her pregnancies had been fabricated, the conversation immediately expanded beyond the personal and the royal into the arenas of medicine and law. Surrogacy is not simply a matter of personal choice. It is shaped by regulations, ethics, and cultural expectations that differ dramatically between countries. Meghan's admission did not only validate years of speculation. It forced the public to confront the legal and medical frameworks that surrounded her deception. Why had she chosen secrecy? Why had she gone to such lengths to present herself as pregnant? And what are the implications for the royal family, which has historically been bound by strict traditions when it comes to lineage and legitimacy? These questions anchor the medical and legal angles of the scandal, revealing just how complex the truth really is. Surrogacy itself is a practice as old as recorded history, though it has evolved significantly in the modern age. In ancient cultures, surrogates were often women within extended families who bore children for those who could not conceive. Today, surrogacy is highly regulated in some countries, barely acknowledged in others, and outright banned in many. In the United Kingdom, where Meghan was living at the time of Archie's supposed pregnancy, surrogacy is legal but tightly controlled. Commercial surrogacy, the exchange of money beyond expenses, is prohibited. Intended parents cannot advertise for surrogates, nor can surrogates advertise themselves. The arrangement must be altruistic, with the surrogate legally recognized as the child's mother at birth until a parental order is issued by a court. In the United States, however, surrogacy laws vary by state, with some states allowing commercial arrangements, others banning the practice entirely, and still others leaving it unregulated. Meghan and Harry, straddling life between the UK and the US, existed at the intersection of these legal frameworks. To admit that her pregnancies were lies is to admit that she deliberately sidestepped the public scrutiny such arrangements would have invited. Why the secrecy? Meghan's defenders argue that the stigma around surrogacy, particularly in royal circles, left her little choice. The monarchy is an institution built on tradition and optics. Lineage is sacred, and the presentation of pregnancy has always been part of that tradition. Diana, Kate, even the Queen before them. all presented their children to the public in ways that symbolized continuity. Surrogacy, while accepted in wider society, remains controversial in aristocratic and royal contexts. The idea that a future heir might be born via surrogate could raise uncomfortable questions about legitimacy, succession, and tradition. Meghan, aware of this, may have chosen to lie not out of malice but out of fear that her children would be treated as less legitimate, fear that she herself would be further marginalized, and fear that the monarchy would use surrogacy against her in their already fraught relationship. Yet the choice to fabricate pregnancies created legal questions of its own. If Meghan and Harry used surrogates while presenting the children as though Meghan had carried them, were any laws violated? In the United Kingdom, falsifying birth details on official records could constitute fraud. In the United States, depending on where the surrogacy took place, failing to disclose the arrangement could complicate legal recognition of parentage. While it is unlikely that Meghan or Harry would face criminal consequences given their status, the secrecy raises ethical dilemmas. Should the monarchy have disclosed the truth, given that these children carry royal titles? Should the public, whose tax money once funded aspects of their royal duties, have been entitled to transparency? Or does surrogacy fall within the bounds of private medical choice, even for public figures? Medical questions also hover over the story. Throughout her supposed pregnancies, Meghan was photographed in ways that suggested she was experiencing all the typical stages of carrying a child. Maternity wear, protective hand placement, even anecdotes in interviews about cravings and fatigue, all painted the picture of a woman experiencing pregnancy firsthand. To fabricate such details raises ethical concerns about the exploitation of maternal imagery. Pregnancy is a deeply personal and often difficult journey for millions of women. By pretending to experience it, Meghan not only deceived the public, but also co-opted the struggles of others for her own narrative. This aspect of her deception drew particular criticism from women who had endured real pregnancies, who argued that her actions trivialized their experiences and used them as props in a performance. Medical professionals were quick to weigh in after the confession. Some argued that Meghan's secrecy could have stemmed from medical issues she wished to keep private. Fertility struggles, miscarriages, or health risks may have led her to surrogacy. If so, her decision to hide the truth reflected a desire to protect herself from invasive questions. Others, however, argued that her deception was harmful precisely because it reinforced the stigma around surrogacy. By pretending to carry her children, Meghan perpetuated the idea that surrogacy must remain hidden, shameful, or unacceptable in elite circles. Had she been honest, she might have normalized it, opening the door for broader acceptance. Instead, she reinforced secrecy as the standard. The legal implications for Archie and Lilibet also deserve consideration. In matters of royal succession, the legitimacy of birth is not merely symbolic, it is constitutional. The line of succession is governed by centuries of precedent, with every birth carefully documented and verified. By concealing the surrogacy, Meghan introduced ambiguity into that process. While both children remain Harry's biological offspring and thus legitimate heirs in a genetic sense, the deception about their births undermines the integrity of the record. Monarchies thrive on continuity, and continuity depends on trust. When that trust is broken, questions about legitimacy linger. Some royal historians now argue that Meghan's deception may create constitutional headaches for future generations if the line of succession is ever contested. Cultural attitudes towards surrogacy also shaped the fallout of the confession. In the United States, surrogacy has become increasingly common, particularly among celebrities. Stars like Kim Kardashian, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Nicole Kidman have all spoken openly about using surrogates. Their openness helped normalize the practice, framing it as a valid and respectable path to parenthood. Meghan could have aligned herself with that trend, presenting herself as a modern royal embracing new methods of family building. Instead, by lying, she positioned herself against that openness. Critics argue that she squandered an opportunity to lead a cultural shift within the monarchy, to show that modern families can take many forms. By choosing deception, she not only damaged her credibility, but also reinforced outdated stigmas. The secrecy also raises ethical concerns about the rights of the surrogates themselves. Who were these women? Were they compensated fairly? Were their stories silenced to protect Meghan's image? Surrogacy is a deeply intimate process that involves physical, emotional, and often financial sacrifice. To erase the surrogate's role entirely, presenting oneself as the mother in every sense, is to deny the reality of their contribution. In the medical and ethical communities, this erasure has been criticized as exploitative. Surrogates deserve recognition and respect, not invisibility. Meghan's deception not only erased them from the narrative, but also cast their role as something to be hidden rather than honored. In legal terms, the monarchy itself may face scrutiny for its handling of the pregnancies. Did palace officials knowingly endorse a lie by issuing official statements? Were birth certificates filed with false information? If so, what are the implications for the monarchy's legal obligations to transparency? These questions will likely never be answered fully, but they highlight the tension between private medical choices and public accountability. For ordinary citizens, surrogacy is a personal matter. For royals, whose lives intersect with state and tradition, it becomes something more. Meghan's choice to lie placed the monarchy in a precarious position, forcing them into silence that now appears as complicity. The medical and legal angles of Meghan's confession therefore cut deeper than personal scandal. They reveal the collision of tradition and modernity, secrecy and transparency, law and deception. They force us to ask difficult questions about what it means to be honest in a world where image often outweighs truth. Meghan's decision to fabricate pregnancies was not just a personal failing. It was a choice with medical, legal, and ethical consequences that ripple outward into society, the monarchy, and her children's future. In trying to avoid stigma, she created scandal. In trying to control her narrative, she lost it. And in trying to protect her family, she may have compromised the very institution into which she married. When Meghan Markle finally admitted the truth, it was natural for the world to turn its attention to one pressing question. Why? What could possibly drive someone to maintain such an elaborate lie for decades? A lie that involved not only herself but her husband, her children, the monarchy, and millions of onlookers worldwide. Her motives, though known only to her in their truest form, can be pieced together from the context of her life, the pressures she faced, and the choices she made. They are a combination of fear, ambition, pride, and survival. To understand Meghan's motives is not to excuse her deception, but to situate it within the broader framework of her personality, her circumstances, and the unique challenges of her position. One of the most obvious motives was fear of stigma. Despite the progress of modern society, surrogacy remains a controversial subject, particularly within traditional and aristocratic circles. The British monarchy, built on centuries of precedent, values appearances as much as reality. Every birth in the line of succession is a matter of public record, an event steeped in ritual and tradition. For Meghan, to admit that she was not carrying her children would have meant breaking sharply with that tradition. She would have risked not only public criticism, but also rejection from within the royal family itself. The fear that her children might be viewed as less legitimate or that she herself might be portrayed as less of a mother likely weighed heavily on her. In choosing deception, Meghan may have believed she was protecting her children from judgment. Ironically, the lie ultimately ensured they would face far more scrutiny than honesty ever would have brought. Another motive was her relationship with the media. From the moment she married Harry, Meghan was placed under a microscope unlike anything she had experienced as an actress. Every gesture, every word, every fashion choice was dissected. Her pregnancies were no different. But Meghan was not simply a passive victim of media scrutiny. She understood its power, and she often wielded it to her advantage. The frequent belly cradling, the carefully staged photo shoots, the way she leaned into the narrative of being a glowing, expectant mother, these were not accidental. They were deliberate acts of image-making. Meghan may have believed that a visible pregnancy was essential to winning public sympathy, securing her place within the monarchy, and crafting a narrative of motherhood that aligned with tradition while still showcasing her as modern and relatable. To admit surrogacy would have undermined that narrative, making her vulnerable to criticism in a way she may have feared she could not control. Control itself is perhaps the central theme of Meghan's motives. Her life with Harry was marked by constant battles over who controlled the story. The palace sought to maintain its traditional grip on messaging. The press sought to spin every detail into a headline. Meghan and Harry fought to seize control of their own narrative, often framing themselves as truth-tellers in the face of hostile forces. In this context, the lie about her pregnancies can be seen as an extension of that struggle. By presenting herself as pregnant, Meghan retained control over one of the most personal and powerful stories she could tell, the story of motherhood. It was an arena in which she could claim authenticity and strength, positioning herself as a symbol of resilience against the cruelty she said she endured. For someone so determined to control how she was perceived, the idea of surrendering that control to the truth of surrogacy may have felt impossible. There is also the question of ambition. Meghan has often been portrayed, fairly or unfairly, as a woman driven by the desire to ascend. From her acting career to her marriage into royalty to her later ventures in media and philanthropy, she consistently sought platforms that elevated her visibility and influence. The pregnancies, real or not, were central to that ambition. A royal baby is not just a child. It is a cultural event, a symbol of continuity that captures global attention. By presenting herself as pregnant, Meghan placed herself at the center of that narrative, ensuring that her image dominated headlines and magazine covers. The bump became a prop in her ambition, a way to solidify her relevance in the royal story. Without it, she risked being sidelined, overshadowed by the senior royals who adhered more closely to tradition. At the same time, Meghan's motives were likely shaped by insecurity. As a biracial, American divorcee entering one of the most rigid institutions in the world, she was acutely aware of the skepticism that surrounded her. Critics accused her of being an opportunist, a disruptor, someone who did not belong. To admit that she could not or did not want to carry her own children might have added fuel to those accusations. It might have painted her as weak, as unwilling or unable to meet the expectations placed on royal wives. By lying, she may have hoped to silence those doubts, to present herself as fully capable of embodying the role she had stepped into. The lie, in this sense, was a shield against her own vulnerability. Meghan's motives cannot be separated from her relationship with Harry. Her devotion to him, and his to her, created a dynamic where loyalty often trumped truth. Meghan may have believed that fabricating pregnancies was an act of love, protecting Harry from the pain of criticism or from the possibility that his children would be viewed differently. Harry, haunted by the loss of his mother, longed for a family that could withstand the pressures of the press and the palace. Meghan may have felt that the illusion of pregnancy was necessary to give him that story, to make him believe that they were building the family he always wanted. Her motive, then, was not simply self-preservation but also preservation of the image of their marriage. Cultural factors also played a role. In Hollywood, where Meghan had spent much of her life, image is everything. Celebrities are accustomed to crafting narratives about themselves, to presenting polished versions of their lives to the public. Surrogacy, while common in Hollywood, is often presented carefully, with explanations and controlled narratives. Meghan's choice to hide it may have stemmed from her Hollywood instincts, that stories must be managed, that appearances must align with expectations, and that vulnerability must be avoided. In marrying into royalty, she brought those instincts into a context where tradition made them even riskier. Finally, there is the possibility that Meghan's motives were rooted in something simpler: fear of losing control over her legacy. She knew that history would record her as the first woman of color to marry into the British royal family, that her children would represent a new chapter in the monarchy's story. But she also knew that her critics were waiting for any sign of weakness, any misstep to use against her. Admitting surrogacy might have given them ammunition to dismiss her children, to undermine her role as a mother, to reduce her significance in the royal narrative. By lying, she may have hoped to protect her legacy, to ensure that her story was written on her terms. The tragedy, of course, is that the lie ultimately destroyed that very legacy, leaving her remembered not for breaking barriers but for deceiving the world. Meghan's motives, then, are not singular but layered. They are the motives of a woman navigating immense pressure, trying to protect her children, control her image, satisfy her ambition, and silence her insecurities. They are motives born of love, fear, pride, and desperation. They explain why she chose deception, even if they cannot justify it. And they remind us that in the end, Meghan was not only lying to the public, she was lying to herself, convincing herself that the illusion she created was necessary, even as it led to her downfall. Her motives make her human, but they also make her responsible. And as history judges her confession, it will judge not only the lie she told, but the reason she told it. When Meghan Markle's confession broke, one of the first things that people did was return to the archive of photographs, videos, and staged appearances that had once defined her pregnancies. Every magazine cover, every public engagement, every candid moment was suddenly reinterpreted in the harsh light of truth. For years, skeptics had argued that these images were not authentic representations of pregnancy, but carefully choreographed performances designed to sustain a lie. With Meghan's own words validating those suspicions, the world began re-examining the visuals that had once been dismissed as harmless or even beautiful. What emerged from this re-examination was not only a clearer picture of the deception, but also an understanding of how powerfully images can manipulate public perception. One of the most infamous visuals was this slipping bump video. It showed Meghan crouching during a public engagement, and as she bent forward, her stomach appeared to fold unnaturally. At the time, critics pounced on it as proof that she was wearing a prosthetic belly. Defenders brushed it off as fabric creasing or the camera angle playing tricks. Mainstream media largely avoided giving the footage serious attention, framing it as conspiracy fodder. After her confession, that clip became one of the most replayed pieces of evidence. It was shown on news broadcasts, dissected in documentaries, and shared millions of times online. What once looked like a curiosity was reframed as undeniable proof that the bump was not real. The moment transformed from rumor into history. Other photographs also resurfaced with renewed scrutiny. Images of Meghan attending royal events showed her belly changing size dramatically from one day to the next. In some photos, she appeared heavily pregnant, her stomach protruding significantly. Just days later, in similar clothing, her belly looked much smaller. Supporters at the time claimed this was due to different fabrics, camera angles, or posture. But after the confession, the explanations lost credibility. These fluctuations now seemed like evidence of multiple prosthetic bumps being used, each selected depending on the optics Meghan wanted to achieve at a given event. This reinterpretation turned what was once dismissed as nitpicking into a case study in manipulation. Then there was the matter of hand placement. Throughout both of her supposed pregnancies, Meghan was rarely seen without her hands resting protectively on her stomach. At first, this gesture was interpreted as a sign of maternal pride, a natural instinct for a mother-to-be. Yet over time, it became a point of mockery, as critics argued it looked excessive, deliberate, and theatrical. Entire montages were created showing Meghan cradling her bump at dozens of public appearances. After the confession, those compilations resurfaced, no longer mocked as over-the-top, but recognized as part of a deliberate strategy to draw attention to the bump. What once looked like maternal instinct was now reframed as stagecraft. Fashion choices were another key element in Meghan's pregnancy performances. Unlike Kate Middleton, who often wore fitted maternity dresses that showed her natural progression, Meghan opted for flowing fabrics, exaggerated silhouettes, and clothing that emphasized the size of her stomach. Some outfits seemed designed to make her appear further along than she actually was, while others minimized her belly. This inconsistency fed the early speculation and became glaring in retrospect. Each outfit was no longer seen as a fashion statement, but as a prop in the construction of a false narrative. Designers and stylists who once praised her choices were forced to reckon with the possibility that they had unwittingly participated in a performance of deception. One particular photograph that received renewed attention was taken during Meghan's visit to Morocco. She appeared in a stunning cream gown, her belly noticeably large and round. Critics had questioned the size at the time, noting how it seemed unusually big for her stage of pregnancy. The image was splashed across front pages worldwide, hailed as glamorous and elegant. After the confession, it became one of the most circulated examples of the performance. Analysts pointed out the stiffness of the bump, the unnatural way the fabric draped, and the theatrical way Meghan placed her hand beneath it. What once symbolized glamour now symbolized fabrication. Even candid paparazzi shots were reevaluated. Images that had once been dismissed as intrusive now became valuable evidence. In some, Meghan appeared with no visible bump despite being supposedly far along. In others, her stomach seemed oddly shaped, protruding in ways that did not align with natural pregnancy. These images, often ignored by mainstream outlets in favor of polished official photos, were resurrected as part of a broader pattern of inconsistency. They showed that the deception was not limited to staged royal events but extended into daily life, where Meghan maintained the illusion even under less controlled circumstances. The re-examination of these images also underscored the role of photographers and media outlets in sustaining the narrative. For years, glossy magazines published maternity shoots featuring Meghan, often emphasizing her supposed glow and maternal instincts. These images, celebrated at the time, were now scrutinized as complicit in perpetuating a lie. Critics asked whether photographers noticed the inconsistencies and chose to ignore them, or whether they were simply too eager for access to question what they saw. The confession turned the spotlight back on the media, exposing how easily even professionals could be manipulated by carefully curated appearances. Body language experts were invited onto news programs to analyze the footage with fresh eyes. They pointed out the exaggerated gestures, the stiffness of her movements, and the inconsistencies between her expressions and the supposed physical strain of pregnancy. Meghan, they argued, appeared more like an actress playing a role than a woman genuinely experiencing the discomfort of carrying a child. These expert analyses added legitimacy to the suspicions, reframing the performances as not only strange but deliberately deceptive. The confession validated their observations, giving them a weight that had been absent when they were first made. What made the re-examination of these staged photos so powerful was the way it changed the public's relationship with memory. Images are often trusted as evidence, as windows into truth. Meghan's confession shattered that trust, showing how easily images can be manipulated, how convincingly a narrative can be staged through visual cues. People who had once celebrated her maternity shoots now felt betrayed, realizing they had been moved by performances rather than realities. The betrayal was not just intellectual, but emotional. Many had invested genuine feelings of joy and admiration into those images, only to discover they were built on lies. The cultural impact of this re-examination extended beyond Meghan herself. It forced broader conversations about authenticity in the age of social media and celebrity culture. If Meghan could sustain such an elaborate deception for so long, what other public figures were doing the same? How many of the images people consume daily are carefully crafted illusions designed to tell a story rather than reflect reality? Meghan's confession became a case study in the dangers of blind trust in imagery, a reminder that in the digital age, what we see is not always what we get. For Meghan, the re-examination of these photos was perhaps the most devastating consequence of her confession. Words can be forgotten, but images endure. Every photograph, every video clip, every maternity outfit remains archived, ready to be replayed and reinterpreted. They will forever serve as evidence of the deception, symbols of a lie that was carefully maintained for years. What was once a record of her supposed journey into motherhood has become a record of her performance, a visual archive of dishonesty that history will not erase. In the end, the staged photos tell a story of control, manipulation, and the limits of deception. They show how Meghan used imagery to craft a narrative that the world believed, how she performed motherhood in front of cameras while hiding the truth. They also show how easily public perception can shift, how quickly admiration can turn to suspicion, and how memory itself can be rewritten by confession. Meghan's staged photos were not just moments in time. They were the foundation of a story that crumbled the moment she admitted the truth. And now, they stand as reminders that even the most polished images can conceal the deepest lies. When Meghan Markle's confession became public, the focus quickly shifted from her and Harry to the broader royal family. The revelation that her pregnancies had been fabricated through deception was not just a personal scandal. It struck at the heart of the monarchy itself. The royal family is not like other families. It is an institution whose survival depends on trust, legitimacy, and the preservation of centuries-old traditions. Every birth, every marriage, every death is more than a personal milestone. It is a national and symbolic event. Meghan's admission that she lied about carrying Archie and Lilibet threatened to destabilize that foundation. The fallout within the family was immediate and far-reaching, even if much of it took place behind closed doors. For King Charles, the confession represented a profound humiliation. As head of the monarchy, he had not only welcomed Meghan into the family, but also defended her position publicly on several occasions, even when tensions with Harry and Meghan began to fracture relations with the palace. He had been there when Meghan and Harry announced their pregnancies, issuing official statements of joy and pride. To discover that those announcements were based on lies placed him in a compromising position. Was he deceived like the public, or did he know and choose to remain silent for the sake of appearances? Either answer was damaging. If he knew, then he had colluded in misleading the nation. If he did not know, then he had been made a fool by his own son and daughter-in-law, a position no monarch can afford. Either way, Charles's reputation for steadiness and dignity took a hit, leaving him vulnerable to criticism at home and abroad. Queen Camilla's position in the fallout was more subtle but no less significant. Known for her pragmatism and her ability to weather storms of controversy, she reportedly viewed Meghan with suspicion from the start. Camilla's relationship with the press, once hostile, had softened over the years, and she had worked tirelessly to repair her own image after the turmoil of Diana's death. Meghan's scandal, however, threatened to undo years of effort to present the monarchy as a stable, united front. For Camilla, the confession was not just about Meghan's dishonesty, but about the collateral damage it caused to the entire institution. Privately, she was said to have been furious, viewing Meghan's actions as reckless and selfish, placing personal image above the survival of the monarchy itself. For Prince William and Catherine, the fallout was even more personal. William had long been wary of Meghan, sensing the disruption she brought into the family from the start. Catherine, who had carried 3 children under the most intense scrutiny, emerged from the scandal looking dignified in comparison. Her visible pregnancies, her willingness to adhere to tradition by presenting her children to the world immediately after birth, stood in stark contrast to Meghan's deception. For Catherine, Meghan's confession was not just a betrayal of the family, but a personal insult. She had endured morning sickness, exhaustion, and the strain of carrying future heirs, all in the public eye, without complaint. To see Meghan pretend to endure the same experiences trivialized her sacrifices. The contrast between the two women could not have been sharper, and public sympathy tilted heavily toward Catherine. William, as heir to the throne, faced perhaps the most difficult position. His role depends on the perception of continuity and legitimacy. Meghan's confession threatened to cast doubt on that legitimacy, raising questions about the authenticity of births within the royal line. Although Archie and Lilibet are not direct heirs, their place in the family tree means their existence still matters to the monarchy's image. For William, the scandal reinforced his sense that Harry's choices had endangered the family. The relationship between the two brothers, already strained, became almost irreparable in the wake of the confession. William was said to have felt not only betrayed but vindicated. His early doubts about Meghan had been confirmed in the most devastating way. But vindication did not erase the damage. The fallout left the brothers more divided than ever, their bond fractured beyond repair. Other royals also felt the effects of the scandal. Princess, and long known for her no-nonsense approach and commitment to duty, reportedly saw Meghan's confession as proof of the dangers of bringing outsiders into the institution without proper vetting. Her reputation for blunt honesty meant that she was one of the few who had voiced concerns early on, and now she was vindicated. Yet even she understood that the damage was not confined to Meghan. The entire family had been tainted by association, forced to endure headlines that framed them as complicit in a lie. For someone like Anne, who had spent decades working quietly and diligently, the scandal was a painful reminder that the monarchy's image could be undone by the actions of just one member. The silence of the palace during the scandal was itself a statement. The royal family has a long tradition of maintaining dignity by refusing to comment on personal controversies. Never complain, never explain, has been the guiding principle for generations. But Meghan's confession tested that principle to its limits. To say nothing was to appear complicit. To speak out was to risk deepening the scandal. In the end, the palace opted for silence, but the public interpreted it in different ways. Some saw it as dignified restraint, proof that the monarchy remained above gossip. Others saw it as cowardice, an unwillingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Either way, the silence did not protect the institution from fallout. Instead, it allowed speculation to grow unchecked, leaving the impression that the monarchy had something to hide. The fallout also extended to the public's perception of the monarchy itself. For decades, the institution had survived scandals, divorces, affairs, even abdication, but rarely had its legitimacy been questioned so directly. Meghan's confession forced people to ask uncomfortable questions about transparency and trust. If the monarchy could lie about something as fundamental as a royal birth, what else had it concealed over the years? For Republicans who had long argued for the abolition of the monarchy, the scandal was a gift. It reinforced their arguments that the institution was outdated, secretive, and dishonest. For loyalists, it was a painful test of faith, forcing them to reconcile their admiration for the crown with the reality of deception. Even internationally, the fallout was significant. The monarchy is not just a British institution, it is a global symbol. From the Commonwealth to the United States, Meghan and Harry had become ambassadors of a modern royal image. Meghan's confession damaged not only her credibility but the monarchy's ability to project itself as stable and trustworthy abroad. Commonwealth nations that were already questioning their ties to the crown found new reason to reconsider. In the United States, where Meghan had been popular, the scandal reshaped her image, casting her as manipulative rather than victimized. For a monarchy that relies heavily on soft power and global influence, the damage was severe. The fallout within the family also raised questions about the future. Could Harry and Meghan ever reconcile with the royals after such a confession? Could Archie and Lilibet be fully accepted by their cousins, aunts, uncles, and grandparents? Or would they always be viewed as the children of a deception? These questions had no easy answers. The scandal created fractures that may never fully heal, leaving the monarchy divided at a time when unity was more important than ever. The damage was not confined to Meghan. It radiated outward, touching every member of the family, every aspect of the institution, and every tradition that had once seemed unshakable. In the end, the royal fallout from Meghan's confession was about more than one lie. It was about trust, legitimacy, and the fragility of an institution that depends on image to survive. The monarchy had weathered storms before, but this was different. This was not a scandal of behavior or personal failing. It was a scandal of truth itself. By lying about her pregnancies, Meghan had forced the world to question not only her, but the family she had married into. And in doing so, she left behind a legacy of doubt that the monarchy may never fully erase. In every era of the British monarchy, scandals have erupted that seemed, at the time, impossible to overcome. There have been abdications, affairs, divorces, and even whispers of illegitimacy. Each of these crises forced the crown to adapt, to endure, or to weather criticism until the storm passed. Meghan Markle's confession, however, belongs to a category all its own. It is not just another scandal of personal behavior or private failure. It strikes at the very heart of legitimacy, the cornerstone upon which monarchy rests. To understand its cultural and historical significance, one must place it alongside the great crises of the past and consider how it both resembles and diverges from them. Only then can we appreciate why this revelation has become one of the most consequential in royal history. One of the closest parallels comes from the abdication crisis of 1936, when King Edward VIII chose to give up the throne in order to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. At the time, it was unthinkable that a monarch would abandon his duty for personal love. The scandal shook the monarchy to its foundations, forcing Edward's younger brother, George VI, onto the throne and reshaping the line of succession. That crisis, like Meghan's confession, revealed the tension between personal desires and institutional duty. Edward placed his love for Wallis above the expectations of the crown, just as Meghan placed her control over her narrative above the monarchy's traditions. Both moments revealed how fragile the institution can be when personal choices collide with public obligations. Another comparison can be drawn with the marital scandals of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. Their divorce in the 1990s, followed by Diana's explosive interview with the BBC, exposed the monarchy to a level of scrutiny it had not faced in modern times. Diana's willingness to speak openly about infidelity, unhappiness, and neglect shattered the illusion of royal perfection. Yet, even in her revelations, the legitimacy of her children was never questioned. William and Harry remained untainted by their parents' marital collapse. Meghan's confession, by contrast, directly implicates her children in the scandal. Archie and Lilibet are not merely witnesses to their parents' drama. They are central figures in a lie that undermines the authenticity of their very births. This makes Meghan's confession far more destabilizing than Diana's interview, because it strikes at lineage, the lifeblood of monarchy. There are also echoes of earlier whispers of illegitimacy within royal history. Throughout centuries, there have been rumors about kings and queens fathering or bearing children outside of marriage, questions about heirs who may not have been biologically related to their supposed parents. These rumors, however, were usually speculative, whispered in court circles, or gossiped about in taverns. Rarely did they receive confirmation from the royals themselves. Meghan's case is unprecedented in that she herself admitted the deception, stripping away the protective veil of rumor. Her words transformed speculation into fact, giving the scandal a weight that no whisper could ever achieve. In this sense, her confession represents something entirely new. A royal scandal not of rumor, but of admission. Beyond the monarchy, Meghan's confession also resonates with cultural shifts around motherhood, surrogacy, and authenticity. In modern society, surrogacy is increasingly accepted, especially in celebrity culture. High-profile figures have spoken openly about using surrogates, helping to normalize the practice and remove stigma. Meghan could have been part of this cultural progression. By embracing surrogacy openly, she could have positioned herself as a trailblazer, breaking centuries of royal precedent in a way that reflected the modern world. Instead, by lying, she placed herself on the wrong side of history. Rather than challenging stigma, she reinforced it, treating surrogacy as something shameful to be hidden. This choice not only damaged her credibility, but also denied the monarchy an opportunity to modernize in a meaningful way. The cultural significance of the confession also lies in its exposure of performance in public life. Royals have always been performers to some extent, living out their roles on the stage of national and global attention. Every wave from a carriage, every speech, every appearance is part of an ongoing performance of monarchy. But Meghan's deception took that performance to an unprecedented level. She did not merely act out the role of a duchess. She acted out the role of a pregnant woman. Her confession forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that much of what we see in public figures may be performance, carefully construed. In every era of the British monarchy, scandals have erupted that seemed, at the time, impossible to overcome. There have been abdications, affairs, divorces, and even whispers of illegitimacy. Each of these crises forced the crown to adapt, to endure, or to weather criticism until the storm passed. Meghan Markle's confession, however, belongs to a category all its own. It is not just another scandal of personal behavior or private failure. It strikes at the very heart of legitimacy, the cornerstone upon which monarchy rests. To understand its cultural and historical significance, one must place it alongside the great crises of the past and consider how it both resembles and diverges from them. Only then can we appreciate why this revelation has become one of the most consequential in royal history. One of the closest parallels comes from the abdication crisis of 1936, when King Edward VIII chose to give up the throne in order to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. At the time, it was unthinkable that a monarch would abandon his duty for personal love. The scandal shook the monarchy to its foundations, forcing Edward's younger brother, George VI, onto the throne and reshaping the line of succession. That crisis, like Meghan's confession, revealed the tension between personal desires and institutional duty. Edward placed his love for Wallis above the expectations of the crown, just as Meghan placed her control over her narrative above the monarchy's traditions. Both moments revealed how fragile the institution can be when personal choices collide with public obligations. Another comparison can be drawn with the marital scandals of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. Their divorce in the 1990s, followed by Diana's explosive interview with the BBC, exposed the monarchy to a level of scrutiny it had not faced in modern times. Diana's willingness to speak openly about infidelity, unhappiness, and neglect shattered the illusion of royal perfection. Yet, even in her revelations, the legitimacy of her children was never questioned. William and Harry remained untainted by their parents' marital collapse. Meghan's confession, by contrast, directly implicates her children in the scandal. Archie and Lilibet are not merely witnesses to their parents' drama. They are central figures in a lie that undermines the authenticity of their very births. This makes Meghan's confession far more destabilizing than Diana's interview, because it strikes at lineage, the lifeblood of monarchy. There are also echoes of earlier whispers of illegitimacy within royal history. Throughout centuries, there have been rumors about kings and queens fathering or bearing children outside of marriage, questions about heirs who may not have been biologically related to their supposed parents. These rumors, however, were usually speculative, whispered in court circles, or gossiped about in taverns. Rarely did they receive confirmation from the royals themselves. Meghan's case is unprecedented in that she herself admitted the deception, stripping away the protective veil of rumor. Her words transformed speculation into fact, giving the scandal a weight that no whisper could ever achieve. In this sense, her confession represents something entirely new, a royal scandal not of rumor but of admission. Beyond the monarchy, Meghan's confession also resonates with cultural shifts around motherhood, surrogacy, and authenticity. In modern society, surrogacy is increasingly accepted, especially in celebrity culture. High-profile figures have spoken openly about using surrogates, helping to normalize the practice and remove stigma. Meghan could have been part of this cultural progression. By embracing surrogacy openly, she could have positioned herself as a trailblazer, breaking centuries of royal precedent in a way that reflected the modern world. Instead, by lying, she placed herself on the wrong side of history. Rather than challenging stigma, she reinforced it, treating surrogacy as something shameful to be hidden. This choice not only damaged her credibility, but also denied the monarchy an opportunity to modernize in a meaningful way. The cultural significance of the confession also lies in its exposure of performance in public life. Royals have always been performers to some extent, living out their roles on the stage of national and global attention. Every wave from a carriage, every speech, every appearance is part of an ongoing performance of monarchy. But Meghan's deception took that performance to an unprecedented level. She did not merely act out the role of a duchess. She acted out the role of a pregnant woman. Her confession forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that much of what we see in public figures may be performance, carefully constructed to evoke emotion, sympathy, or admiration. In an age dominated by social media, where image often outweighs substance, Meghan's confession is a cautionary tale about the dangers of consuming appearances without questioning their authenticity. Historically, the monarchy has relied on secrecy and silence to survive scandals. Queen Elizabeth II perfected the art of endurance, weathering storms by refusing to engage with gossip and allowing time to erase public outrage. That strategy may no longer work in the digital age. Meghan's confession proved how impossible it is to maintain illusions when every photograph can be dissected, every video slowed down, every inconsistency analyzed by millions of people online. The digital archive ensures that deception cannot remain hidden forever. Unlike past scandals, which could fade into the background, Meghan's deception is preserved in perpetuity, accessible at any moment for scrutiny. This makes her confession historically unique, a scandal that cannot simply be forgotten or ignored. The confession also has broader implications for the institution of monarchy itself. For centuries, monarchs have justified their existence through a narrative of legitimacy. They are not elected. They inherit their roles through bloodline. If the authenticity of that bloodline is called into question, the entire institution begins to crumble. Meghan's lie, by undermining the authenticity of her children's births, struck directly at this foundation. Even if Archie and Lilibet remain legitimate heirs in a genetic sense, The perception of deceit around their births weakens the public's trust. Monarchy is, at its core, a story that people must believe in. When that story is exposed as fiction, its power wanes. Meghan's confession, therefore, has historical significance not just as a personal scandal, but as a threat to the continuity of monarchy itself. At the same time, Meghan's confession reflects broader cultural anxieties about truth in public life. In an era defined by misinformation, media manipulation, and distrust of institutions, her admission becomes symbolic. It is not just about her, but about the fragility of trust itself. People want to believe in authenticity, whether in leaders, celebrities, or royals. When that authenticity is revealed to be false, it deepens cynicism and reinforces the belief that nothing in public life can be trusted. Meghan's deception thus becomes part of a larger cultural narrative about disillusionment in the modern age. She is not just a duchess who lied about pregnancy. She is a symbol of the broader crisis of trust that defines our time. Looking back at history, some scandals have ultimately been absorbed into the monarchy's narrative, transformed into lessons, or even sources of renewed strength. The abdication crisis led to the rise of George VI, whose steady leadership during World War II restored faith in the crown. Diana's tragic story reshaped the monarchy's relationship with the public, forcing it to adapt to new expectations of openness and emotion. Whether Meghan's confession will ultimately weaken or strengthen the monarchy remains to be seen. It may serve as a cautionary tale that prompts greater transparency in the future, or it may linger as a wound that never fully heals. Either way, its cultural and historical significance is undeniable. It will be remembered as the moment when the illusion of royal perfection collided with the reality of human deception, leaving behind a legacy that no amount of silence or tradition can erase. By the time Meghan Markle turned 60, her life had already been divided into chapters that seemed to belong to different people. There was Meghan the actress, hustling in Hollywood and playing supporting roles while trying to break into an industry that often measured her by her race or her looks. There was Meghan the Duchess, the woman who captivated the world with a fairy tale marriage into the British royal family. There was Meghan the Rebel, the one who, alongside Harry, turned her back on royal duty to chart her own path in America. And now there was Meghan the Confessor, the woman who, after decades of secrecy, admitted that her pregnancies were lies and that her children were born through surrogacy. At 60, she had come full circle, her life story no longer defined by ambition or rebellion but by truth, or at least the version of truth she finally chose to share. For Meghan, 60 was a turning point not just because of age, but because of perspective. Aging has a way of forcing reflection. The illusions that can be sustained in youth become harder to maintain with time. Regrets grow heavier, and the desire to leave behind a legacy becomes stronger. Meghan's confession at this stage of life was not simply a revelation about the past. It was a signal that she understood the limits of time. She could no longer carry the lie indefinitely. Whether driven by conscience, exhaustion, or the need to unburden herself, she chose this moment to rewrite her own story. And in doing so, she forced the world to reconsider the woman she had been for the last 3 decades. Her reflection at 60 is inevitably colored by the contradictions of her life. As an actress, she had spent years crafting roles, performing for the camera. As a duchess, she had once again become a performer, this time on the global stage of royalty. Even her pregnancies had become performances, carefully staged for maximum effect. Now, by confessing, she stripped away the performance, admitting that the role of expectant mother was one she had only acted. This realization gives her life a strange symmetry. From actress to duchess to confessor, Meghan had always been playing roles, but at 60, she finally stepped into the role of truth-teller, however belatedly. The irony is that this final role may be the one that defines her most powerfully, overshadowing all that came before. Meghan at 60 is also a figure marked by regret. Every choice has consequences, and her decision to lie about carrying her children reshaped not only her own reputation, but also the lives of her husband and children. Looking back, she must have understood the ripple effect of her actions. The joy of announcing pregnancies, the adoration of crowds, the front-page headlines. All of it came at a cost that would one day have to be paid. At 60, she faced that payment. Her confession may have been an attempt to reclaim honesty, to leave behind a legacy not entirely consumed by deceit. But it also carried the bitter recognition that her choices had damaged not just herself, but the people she loved most. Regret, at this stage, is not something that can be undone. It is something one must live with. At the same time, there is a possibility that Meghan's confession at 60 was an act of liberation. Carrying a lie for decades is an exhausting burden. Every photograph, every interview, every appearance required her to maintain the performance. Even as rumors swirled and critics dissected her every move, she had to remain steadfast, never faltering in her portrayal of authenticity. To finally speak the truth may have been a release, a way of freeing herself from the chains of her own deception. For the first time in years, she could exist without the weight of secrecy. In this sense, her confession was not only an act of regret, but also one of relief, a way of unburdening herself before the final chapters of her life. The public, however, did not see liberation, they saw betrayal. Meghan's reflection at 60 is inseparable from the way the world views her now. She is remembered less as the actress who broke barriers by marrying into the royal family, and more as the duchess who deceived the world. Her legacy is complicated, filled with contradictions that cannot easily be resolved. She is both a woman who endured relentless media scrutiny and a woman who manipulated that scrutiny for her own ends. She is both a mother who loves her children and a woman who lied about how they came into the world. At 60, she embodies the complexity of human choices, the ways in which ambition, fear, and love can drive someone to decisions that seem unforgivable yet understandable at the same time. Her reflection is also shaped by her relationship with Harry. By 60, their marriage had endured more storms than most could withstand. From the Oprah interview to the move to America to years of relentless criticism, they had stood together against the world. Meghan's confession inevitably raised questions about whether Harry had known all along or whether he, too, had been misled. For Meghan, reflecting on her life at 60, this tension must have been painful. If he knew, then she had forced him into complicity, binding him to a lie that damaged his relationship with his family and his credibility with the public. If he did not know, then her confession was also a betrayal of the man who had defended her at all costs. Either way, the marriage that once symbolized defiance against tradition was now entangled in a deception that neither of them could escape. On a broader level, Meghan at 60 is a cultural figure whose life story reflects the struggles of modern womanhood in the public eye. She faced expectations to be flawless, to embody tradition while also symbolizing progress. She was expected to be both relatable and regal, private and transparent, authentic and polished. These contradictions would challenge anyone, but for Meghan, they became insurmountable. Her confession may be seen, in part, as the ultimate surrender to those contradictions. She could not live up to the image she had projected, so she admitted the lie and let the world judge her as she was. This, too, is part of her reflection, the recognition that perfection is impossible and that the pursuit of it often leads to self-destruction. For historians, Meghan's life at 60 offers a case study in how modern celebrity culture collides with ancient institutions. She entered the monarchy at a moment when its survival depended on adaptation, on becoming more modern and inclusive. She had the potential to be a bridge between tradition and progress, a figure who could redefine what it meant to be royal in the 21st century. Instead, by choosing deception, she undermined that possibility. Her confession at 60 is therefore not just personal, but historical. It marks the moment when a woman who could have modernized the monarchy instead became one of its greatest scandals. Her reflection is not just about her own life, but about the choices that shaped the trajectory of the institution she once belonged to. In the final analysis, Meghan at 60 is a woman confronting the truth of her own contradictions. She is neither wholly villain nor wholly victim, but something in between. She is a reminder that human beings are capable of extraordinary resilience and extraordinary deception, often at the same time. Her confession forces us to grapple with uncomfortable truths about authenticity, trust, and the pressures of public life. It also forces Meghan herself to reckon with the choices she made, the lies she told, and the legacy she will leave behind. At 60, she stands not as the glowing duchess of her early years or the embattled exile of her middle years, but as a woman who finally admitted the truth, however late, however painful, however devastating to her story. The future of Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and the Sussex legacy is perhaps the most uncertain aspect of this entire confession. By admitting to lying about her pregnancies, Meghan has fundamentally altered the trajectory not only of her own reputation, but of her husband's and her children's. The scandal is no longer confined to the past. It projects itself forward, shaping how the world will view the Sussexes for decades to come. The question now is whether they can rebuild, reframe, or recover from this revelation, or whether the legacy they leave behind will be permanently defined by deception. For Meghan, the future is complex. At 60, she has little time left to reshape her image. The confession, while damaging, could be interpreted as a final attempt at honesty, a way of reclaiming her narrative before history closed its book on her. If she chooses to lean into this honesty, to speak openly about why she lied and what it cost her, she may be able to salvage some measure of respect. Vulnerability has a strange power in public life. People often forgive when they sense genuine remorse, especially if the confession leads to broader cultural conversations. Meghan could still become a figure who sparks dialogue about surrogacy, stigma, and the pressures faced by women in public life. If she embraced this role, her confession might not only define her legacy but redeem it in a limited way. But the alternative is just as likely. Meghan could retreat into silence, refusing to elaborate on her motives or accept responsibility beyond the admission itself. In that case, her legacy would harden around the image of dishonesty. She would be remembered not as a trailblazer or reformer, but as a deceiver, someone who manipulated public sympathy and tarnished the monarchy for personal gain. History has little patience for figures who expose deception without showing contrition. If Meghan remains defensive or evasive, she risks locking herself into a legacy that will overshadow every other achievement of her life. For Harry, the future may be even more fraught. His identity has always been shaped by contrasts. The boy grieving Diana, the rebellious young man caught in tabloid scandals, the devoted husband defending Meghan, and the outspoken critic of the monarchy. Meghan's confession forces him into a new role, one defined by suspicion. Did he know? Was he complicit? Or was he as deceived as the public? These questions will follow him for the rest of his life, and his ability to answer them convincingly will determine whether his own legacy survives intact. If Harry admits that he knew about the deception, he risks being remembered as a man who betrayed not only his family but also his nation, aligning himself with a lie that undermined the institution into which he was born. His credibility as a truth-teller, already fragile, would collapse entirely. If he insists that he did not know, he risks being remembered as naive or powerless, a man manipulated by his wife in matters as fundamental as the birth of his children. Neither path is flattering. Both leave his reputation damaged. The challenge for Harry will be to craft a narrative that acknowledges the truth without destroying his own dignity. That may involve positioning himself as someone who was trapped, loyal to a fault, but ultimately betrayed as much as the public. Whether people believe that narrative is another question entirely.